So as I was trying to decide what I was going to say, I was reflecting a little bit on something that happened last spring that I imagine a lot of you are aware of, the kind of blow up that happened when the kind of anti-trans policy at Grizzly Pines became like pretty public and visible. I imagine a lot of people. It's some recognition, right? And I made a tremendous mistake, which was reading comments on a random Facebook post, which is just not a thing to share. And getting into those comments and fighting. So this was probably a pretty self-destructive mechanism at the time. But I was going back and forth with some people, some of whom seemed to be operating in good faith, some didn't. And I have to say the majority of the comments anywhere about this, I guess I should say for people who aren't aware, Grizzly Pines is a kind of gay male campground in Texas, and I think it had been quietly known by some people, but not by others, that they explicitly saw the campground as a place for cis gay men. And it kind of came to a head when the Houston Bears were planning to have a kind of event there, and they were told kind of at the last minute that their trans members could not attend. And so and they made a kind of public statement about it and pulled out of the event. And so I have to say the majority of the people in any kind of public conversation I saw were pretty upset about what the policy was at Grizzly Pines. There were clearly a lot of people who didn't know, but there were a number of people who were saying, yeah, this is this is good, this is how it should be. I'm not transphobic, but I just want some place to just be for cis gay men. Some people who were, explicitly transphobic. And so I got into some of these conversations. I was trying to have this kind of constructive dialogue. Again, probably not the best decision for social media. But I got into one exchange with a person that I still kind of think about because I think it taught me something, which is this person was going back and forth with these kind of intellectual arguments, he was kind of trying to go down that road of saying, well, I'm gay and that means that I don't want to have, sex with people who are not cis men, and therefore, I don't want to see those people, at my campground. And my response to that was, and always is, well, you don't have to sleep with anybody you don't want to. I don't really understand why this, matters to you. And what ultimately happened in that conversation is, as we kept going back and forth, he ultimately said, look, I just only want to be around people with, who are men who had, growing up experiences like mine, and who, I can share that with because I see that as a really kind of, spiritually important thing. And so he was clearly talking about, these kinds of wounds of being raised male and toxic parts of masculinity, etc. And the reason that really struck me is because my immediate thought was, me too. That was kind of always what I wanted, right? I think all of us who, no matter what your gender, have some kind of experience of toxic masculinity and kind of growing up and figuring out gender. And for me, it wasn't until I transitioned that I was like, oh, I'm able to kind of access male spaces in a way that I always felt like something that would have been natural for me. And so I raised this to make the point that, I think it's important to be cognizant of both the ways that trans people, trans experiences, trans politics are different, but also the ways in which we're the same. And I think identifying those two categories can be difficult sometimes. And so I'm just going to talk about kind of a couple of places that I've thought about this over time, but I think this is an ongoing collective conversation. One difference that I've kind of reflected on is differences in what it means to be out as a trans person versus being out as a queer person or as a kinky person. I think there's some similarities in those two things, but also some differences, at least for some members of the community. And I should say, I'm really only speaking here for myself and my own experiences as a pretty binary trans man. I think one thing that to be aware of is that I think especially when we're in queer spaces or gay spaces or kinky spaces, there's a sense that, okay, we're all out, at least among each other, and that means that, there can be this kind of power in sharing that outness, within that community. I think that's really true. But one thing I would just caution is to say that I think one thing that's been interesting for me to navigate as a trans person is that even if you are someone who knows that a person is trans, that doesn't necessarily mean that that person is kind of in a position that they want everyone to know that they're trans, or to kind of for that to be the first thing that somebody knows about them. And I don't mean that in a sense of like being out versus being stealth. This is kind of binary, but I think especially in this kind of moment. Is there any way I can adjust this? It's like it was weird. Oh wait, that might be better. Can people still hear me? Yeah, I think there's just a bit of a thing about being out across categories, but also, being trans is always kind of navigating like an odd line between wanting to be visible and wanting to not be visible in certain times and places. So I think that's just something to think about. Is that even in spaces where people are out of other identities, they might not feel like that wants to be information that they leave with. But some people do, so it's also a matter of kind of finding out for the individual. That said, I think that it's really important for us, especially in this political moment, to think about similarities between how trans people are being demonized right now and how, especially kind of queer, gay people, but also any kind of sexual minority has been demonized in the past and continues to be demonized. Obviously, I think there's some really clear parallels between the kinds of rhetoric being used about trans people now and historical, demonization of, especially gay men. I'm thinking, of course, about the idea that someone's a groomer. We see this, overlap a lot in that the same language is applied to trans people, especially trans women, and to like drag queens, right? Like this is like, it's all clearly part of the same script. And I think that that's one of the things that is so baffling to me about the LGBT without the T, is just like, how do you not see these parallels? I'm out of time, I'm talking too long, but the last thing I'll say is that I think it's a really important part of us in terms of focusing on community care to think about both our distinct and our shared visions for the future, and as much as we can, draw ourselves back to these visions of the future, because I think, at least speaking for myself in this moment, it's very easy to get stuck on all of the struggles and all the fights we're up against, and if we can kind of have a positive vision of what the future is, I think that can be sustaining for all of us. I'll just leave it. Thanks.
So,